Welcome to Legendary Physique. I'm your host, Richard Baldwin, and I'm talking to Jerry Brainum about his June issue of Applied Metabolics.
Jerry, that last issue was amazing. I particularly like the one on protein supplements and food and how to get what from what and what's the best and what isn't, all that stuff. That one article was worth the whole thing. And then you had something on strength. So, gosh, those two articles made that whole issue. I mean, if that was all that I got all year in my subscription, that would have been enough.
Well, you know, I don't laugh. There's more information in those two articles than there is in over a year of the current whatever remains of bodybuilding articles. Trust me on
Absolutely.
that. You know.
There's more because in those magazines they're just promoting supplements that don't work. You give the truth
Yeah.
about supplements and about everything else.
Well, I mean, like a good example is that article you just mentioned about getting protein from regular food. You'd never see that in a bodybuilding, and you won't see it on a lot of online sites because they're promoting or they're associated with companies that sell protein supplement. And why would they put an article on that would actually hurt their sales? I mean, this is something that's unique about my newsletter because I'm not associated with any commercial supplement companies. I could tell the whole truth and nothing but. I mean, it's a rarity these days because all of them are anything that takes ads. You got to be a little careful about because they're getting paid, to keep things out or not say certain things.
Well, I became a subscriber because I've known you for how many years? 30, 40, whatever it is. And
Yeah, back
78,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I know
yeah,
you know what you're talking about, and you read more than anybody I know. So I know,
right.
and you've got a scientific mind. You can tell BS from truth. So that makes it worth it right there.
Yeah, well, you see that one of the things again that's different about my publication, Applied Metabolics, is it's not just a question of presenting science in a popular manner that people understand. The secondary advantage is that myself, as a feature, I mean, I have, as you know, I've been involved in this stuff for well, it's going on 57 years now, and I've been very studious about learning everything, learning every aspect. There was a former Mr. America who once told me that I could have been a top bodybuilding champion, except I think too much. But I consider that an asset when it comes to something like this newsletter because I think things through. And as you said, I present the truth. I have no axes to grind. I'm just trying to help people out and give them useful and practical information.
Great. So let us know what we got coming up in this May issue.
Well, in the May issue, I have an article on, there's a lot of confusion, Richard, about protein content of meals. Like people, they don't differentiate. I mean, I've spoken to bodybuilders over the years that, and Phil Heath, the current Mr. Olympia, has mentioned this in some recent video. These guys are taking in massive amounts of protein, sometimes up to 600 grams a day, in the belief that they use all of that protein.
That shows how far behind I am because I heard 300 and I thought, holy mackerel, that's crazy.
Some of it. Well, the idea, the rationale is that, well, I'm a big guy. I compete at 270, so I got to have about twice as much protein as I weigh, and that, of course, is not based on any science whatsoever. So it's led to some confusion when it comes to how much protein you should eat in each meal, because I remember when I had a debate years ago and I mentioned this in the article, with a young pharmacy intern where we were talking about protein, how much protein can you use in one meal? And this was like 45 years ago. He came up with the figure of 30 grams. And I said, wait a minute, 30, where'd you get 30 grams from? I said, that doesn't make sense. And I remember thinking at the time, I was eating about 250 grams of myself. So I said to myself, if this guy's right, all my protein is being wasted, and I'm making gains, so he just has to be wrong. So I offered to make a bet with the guy. If he could prove to me, show me scientific evidence that 30 grams, he wins the bet. I'd have to pay him, I think I made the bet for about $5,000, which was a lot of money back then.
It's a lot of money to me now.
And by the way, it was money I didn't have. I have to admit it. I have to be honest here. But it never came to that because I never saw the guy again. But the funny thing is, at that time, I would have won the bet because, there really was no evidence that 30 grams. And the ironic part is now we fast forward like almost a half a century later, and it turns out that there is a limit to how much protein is required for actual what they call muscle protein synthesis. Now, there's a difference between muscle protein synthesis and whole body fractional protein synthesis, meaning muscle protein synthesis, as the name implies, is strictly related to muscle, whereas the whole body, that's protein synthesis anywhere, your internal organs, your skin, your tissues, brain neurotransmitters,
Your hair,
all of these.
everything, right?
Your hair, yeah, exactly, nails. All of these involve protein synthesis, but it's not muscle protein synthesis. So what this article goes into is it differentiates between how much protein is needed to promote actual muscle protein synthesis, which is the cornerstone of muscular gains or muscular hypertrophy, and what happens to the rest of the protein. And it also differentiates between how much protein you can absorb and how much protein you can actually use to build muscle. And there's a big difference, because the truth of the matter is, and I'll give you a flat statement, there's no limit to how much protein you can absorb. You can absorb all the protein you eat. It doesn't mean that's going to be used for muscle building. That's where the guys who ingest 600 grams of protein go wrong, because in their minds, they're using all 600 grams to build muscle. That is strictly in their own minds. It's not happening in reality. No human being can use 600 grams of protein, and I don't care how many meals a day you ingested it.
Well, I can't wait to read that article.
So that first article is going to clear up a lot of confusion about protein needs.
Great.
I give exact amounts, so everyone will know after reading this exactly. I don't care what your level of genetics are or training experience. Anyone who reads that article will know exactly how much protein and how to consume it for maximal gains. The next article is, let me give you a example. Do you remember when Arthur Jones came on the scene in the 70s? He came on the scene with this thing called the Nautilus training system, which is an erupted, a very huge departure, a sea change from the normal way most bodybuilders train. Most bodybuilders back then, bodybuilders were doing 20 to 30 sets of muscle group. Here, this little guy comes along and says, you shouldn't do more than 2 to 3 sets per muscle. And all the bodybuilders thought he was absolutely crazy and all that. And, I remember we were joking back then, because Jones kept on reducing the amount of training volume. He started out with 3 sets, then he went to 2 sets. Then towards the end, he was telling people to do 1 set of each, just 1 set per exercise.
That's what he told me and El Darden was 1 set to failure.
Exactly, 1 set to failure. I remember a lot of the guys who were bodybuilders, they were making jokes. They said, "What's next? No training at all?" And the funny thing is, this next article discusses basically, the new study which compares what they call no-load training. And as the name implies, there's no weights involved. There's no weight resistance versus weight resistance and the effects on the upper arm, the bicep muscle. Unfortunately, the subjects of the study were untrained. And as you know, untrained subjects, if they comb their hair, they get like an inch on their bicep. So it may not apply to advance. But the point of the matter is, the underlying question is, can you, using your own, let's say, body resistance, pitting one muscle against a, can it actually produce some level of muscle hypertrophy? And the first guy to actually claim that, guy you might have heard of, Charles Atlas. You remember Charles Atlas?
Yeah, with his dynamic tension. Yeah.
Yeah, his system was called dynamic tension, which basically involved a couple of freehand exercises like sit-ups and push-ups. But the main crux of the training was doing like taking, let's say, put your hand on your wrist and doing a curl, but resisting with your arm. But you have to do a full range of movement, bring it all the way up. Not isometric. If you just go like this in one position and flex your arm as hard as possible, that's called an isometric contraction. That's not so great for muscle size. It only produces strength at that one angle. Your arm will get strong when you do this, only in this. It won't be strong here, it won't be strong here, it'll only be strong here.
You remember that fad for isometric training, and they were, even the weightlifters were doing it. I'm like, give me a break.
Yeah, they had I remember the power racks and all that.
Yeah.
And isometric training, the bottom line with it is it really worked, but the thing that people misunderstand about it worked at only the angle you did it at.
Yeah.
In other words, a lot of guys who had a stick, they have sticking points in the bench press. For a lot of guys who wanted to increase their bench press, They'd get it up 3/4 of the way, and then they couldn't lock out. They couldn't lock out. So what they do is they'd set a power rack to the right angle of the sticking point, and they'd use an overload. They'd use more weight than they can actually press, and they would try and push it up. And the first couple of times, they weren't moving the weight. That was an isometric contraction, but it was strengthening the muscle in the exact area where the sticking point was.
Yeah.
So if they did it enough, they would actually break through the sticking point and get the bench press. They'd meet their goals. So in other words, it worked at a specific angle.
Yeah.
But this article,
But you're not going to build a physique or a good squat just doing an isometric in one area. Yeah.
No, it's strictly for increasing, let's say, getting around sticking point.
Yeah.
And by the way, in an upcoming article, I'm going to, which reminds you, I'm going to be discussing the science of other methods of breaking sticking points, how to get around sticking points where you're not growing or you're not getting stronger. And certain extent, I'm going to tell how to overcome that in a future issue of Applied Metabolics. Nobody's ever talked about that, as far as I know. But anyway, getting back to this one, I will quickly add that Charles Atlas, he claimed that he won a title called the world's best developed man in 1922. He beat out 779 other men to do this. He claimed that his physique, he had a nice physique for his day. He did. He had a kind of physique that even today most people would really admire, because he wasn't excessively muscularly defined. Yeah. He did look like a pro bodybuilder. He had abs. He had a nice physique for a man. He was a good-looking guy. But, the thing is, it was found out later on that he used to sneak away and do weight training, too.
Yeah,
so
I heard that. Rumors of that.
I have a sneaky suspicion that the majority of his physique was built by traditional weight training. He was just a little bit too muscular to be built strictly by dynamic tension. So you say to me, well, what is the purpose of no-load training? What can it do? Well, what it can do is it's like a supplementary exercise. Let's say you're in a situation where you have no access to a gym. If you do this no-load training where you apply resistance against your own muscles, it'll probably maintain, because the study showed that no-load training was, as long as you applied enough tension to the muscle and did a full range of motion, was just as effective as doing one-arm dumbbell curls for bicep size, which was very surprising result. But I know you're probably thinking, well, can anyone really build a physique doing that? I say the answer is probably not. Yeah. I don't know how it might be applicable to the arms and certain other muscles, maybe the pectorals.
Yeah, but I don't believe that it's as effective as weights. If I see somebody build a competition level bicep just doing dynamic tension.
No, you can't. Yeah. You can't do that. But because just the mere fact of the progressive resistance, the overload effect of weight training, you can't really duplicate that with freehand exercise. And sure enough, the study showed that one difference between the weight training group and the no-load group, only the weight training group got stronger. So that kind of underscores what you're saying there about that. So that's, like I say, it's a supplemental. It's very interesting. I discussed some of the nuances, some of my feelings about this, how it could be used practically. And the third article is the biggest article of the three articles included in the May issue. This talks about probiotic supplements. Probiotic supplements are related, what they call to the intestinal microbiome, which is the population of trillions of bacteria located in the colon, which have extremely far-reaching effects on health, affecting everything from cardiovascular health to obesity, brain health, immune system response. The idea is that taking probiotic supplements can actually help you, let's say, change or balance your intestinal bacteria. It's a very, very controversial issue, because a lot of scientists say that even if the probiotic supplements are absorbed, most of them don't. They compare it to dropping a drop of water in the ocean and expecting the ocean to increase. The waves to increase or whatever. But it doesn't really work that well, as I explained in the article. There's things that are overlooked when you make a statement like that. And there is some, definite evidence showing that probiotic supplements can be useful, especially if they're combined with what they call prebiotic foods, which I talk about in the article also. Prebiotics are basically indigestible carbohydrates like dietary fiber and certain indigestible sugars like inulin or fructooligosaccharides that humans cannot digest, but when they're ingested, for example, in vegetables, they can be digested by the intestinal bacteria, which in turn, after being fed these prebiotics, they produce what they call short-chain fatty acids, which probably are the key reason why the intestinal microbiome is so important, because these short-chain fatty acids have absolutely incredible effects on health, incredible. One of them, we call butyric acid or butyrate, can travel in the blood to the brain. And again, this is just preliminary studies. I'm not going to say that it's going to cure this particular disease, but this preliminary studies show it can travel to the brain and prevent the accumulation of toxic proteins in the brain that cause Alzheimer's disease. And this could be one reason why people that eat a lot of certain vegetables have a much lower risk, as low as 70% decreased risk of Alzheimer's. This is something to consider, because any baby boomers watching this, the rate of Alzheimer's disease is expected to explode in the next couple of years. You want to do everything you can to prevent that.
Well,
so
one reason I think is because we're living so much longer, right?
Yes, it has a lot to do with it. There's some scientists that claim that anyone who lives long enough has a certain degree of Alzheimer's disease. In other words, however, I dispute that, because I remember reading an article in a medical journal where they did extensive brain studies of the woman who holds the record for the longest lived human in history. Her name was Jean Calmet. She lived to 121 years, I believe, 122 years. She died in I can't remember what year, but I know she was born in 1875, so you can figure it out. She actually met Vincent van Gogh when she was 10 years old. That's how old she was.
Wow.
But the thing is, they did brain scans when she was 115. 115. She showed no signs of brain degeneration, except for two things. She was blind and she was deaf. But as far as her actual brain, no sign of Alzheimer's, no sign of cognitive deficits. She was as sharp as somebody who was less than half her age. Wow. So this notion that Alzheimer's disease is inevitable, I say, and I'm going to be blunt, bullshit. I say it's bullshit. I think it's largely preventable. A lot of scientists will disagree with me. From what I've studied, I disagree. You have to take preemptive strike against it. You have to eat in a certain way. You have to exercise. But no one is destined, even if you have the genetics, certain genetic predispositions. Huh?
That's right. I misspoke. Yeah. Genetic predispositions, yeah.
Yeah, if you have certain predispositions, it does increase the risk, such as having two genes for something called apolipoprotein AAE. That can increase your chances of Alzheimer's by 80%. But even in that case, it's not inevitable. There's many people that have those two genes that don't get Alzheimer's disease. So they must be doing something right?
Well, I remember two twin sisters. One of them got cancer and was dying, and the other one was freaking out. But she didn't smoke and she didn't drink, and her sister did. So she didn't turn on that cancer gene.
Right.
So environment can make a difference.
They call that epigenetics.
Yes, exactly.
What it means is, up until maybe a decade ago, they thought that genes were destiny. Yeah. In other words, any genes you were born with, you had no control over. If you had genes for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, you were screwed, period. There's nothing you could do. But now they know, and this is like fantastic, wonderful news for every human being that walks the face of the earth. A lot of this had to do with the Human Genome Project, where they identified the human genome. They now know that genes, even disease genes, can be turned on and off by the way you live. Yeah. Regarding
found
exercise.
That with psychopaths. But because you have the gene doesn't necessarily mean you will be one, but the environment can turn it on. Yeah.
Well, I remember reading a book by a neurologist who underwent tests which showed that he had the complete gene profile for psychopathy. In other words, he was basically clinically a psychopath himself, right? And this guy, you know what the funny thing was? He didn't know this. He was an expert on psychopathy, and he didn't know that he himself was a psychopath. But as he pointed out accurately, he never did anything in any way that could be construed as negative psychopathic behavior. Although, in looking back, he admitted, when he really analyzed his own behavior, he realized that some of the things he had done would be listed under psychopathy, such as his extreme drive to succeed, at the expense of others without really worrying too much about what happened to the others. That was one of the things he admitted was a quality of psychopathy that he did have.
Well, I think they've determined that a lot of CEOs and highly qualified surgeons have a sociopathic personality.
Right.
They just don't go
I,
around, killing people or doing anything either.
I've read that theory. Of course, nobody can really test this, but the theory about this, about 99% of them fall into that category. And the way sociopathy works, it's like a divergent road. In other words, you can have the criminal negative sociopathy where somebody becomes a serial killer, for example, or you could take that same lack of conscience and drive and ability to manipulate people and use it to become very successful in business or movies, or I'm not mentioning any names, or other aspects of life where people consider you a huge success. In other words, you've used your inherent sociopathic traits to succeed. And again, it depends on which road you take.
Well, I've met people myself who are millionaires, and I watched them over the years, and I saw them do things that I would never do because money was their main thing, and they would do things that were sometimes even illegal but got away with it.
Yeah. Well, I've actually studied. I guess the current term is sociopathy. It used to be psychopathy. I've actually read about maybe 15 books on it, where by the time it's gotten to the point where I can now recognize a psychopath, or let me say call them sociopath, when I meet them. If I have a long enough conversation, male or female, I can sense a sociopath. And what I do then is and this is what all the books recommended, by the way, is to turn and run as fast as you can away from them, because it's a no-win situation when you're dealing with a sociopath. And I use the word pity. I pity any human being, male or female, who has the misfortune to get in any kind of personal relationship or business relationship with a sociopath. You will rue the day you met these people. Never, there's no way around it.
Well, back to this article. I mean, it's only been a few years too since they've even known about the microbiome, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact,
and yet now they found how important it is to our health and everything.
Oh yeah, for years they just thought, they thought this bacteria. Oh well, it manufactured a couple of vitamins like vitamin K, vitamin called biotin, and they figured that's all right. It was a symbiotic relationship. In other words, it didn't really hurt humans. It might have helped a little bit with digestion. That was the full extent of it. But then the research started to boom, and they actually they were able to figure out they have a microbiome genome, just like they have a human genome. And like I say, there's trillions of them. Your body, the extent of bacteria that a human carries, it's 3 pounds. That bacteria weighs 3 pounds that resides in your colon, which just happens coincidentally to be the same weight of the human brain and the human heart. They're all 3 pounds. They call the human brain the 3-pound universe. Yeah. So, I mean, anyone who studies I wanted to write an article on the microbiome for my applied metabolics, but the research is so extensive. I realized it would be like a 300-page article by the time I'm finished. That's how much data are coming out almost every week about that. There's every week they find something new about this. Not a day goes by almost where there isn't a news item about the effects of the microbiome.
We have a third article too, don't you?
Pardon me?
You have a third article too, right?
Didn't I talk? No, I talked about optimal protein meal. That's the first one.
Yeah.
Second one was the no low trade, and third one's
probiotics. That's right. Okay.
Yeah, I usually have like 3 to 4 articles.
I got so caught up in this last one, I forgot the last one. Yeah.
No, you see, what determines the number of articles in each issue is the length of the articles, and it turns out the probiotic one is very extensive. I wanted to really put in everything that people need to know. I also told them what to look for in probiotic supplements, what to avoid, possible side effects, which ones would benefit health, and all that. So it came out to quite a few. That article alone, I think, is something like 25 pages. So, because of that,
the one that you're talking about, the no load thing. I mean, I used to do some of that when I was in a hotel and they didn't have weights, and I forgot all about it. So I may start doing it again just reading your article.
Well, let's say that you're on the road, Richard, or something. I know that you like to travel or something, and you just, maybe you're with your lady or something, and you just don't have time, or the gym's too far. You can do this in your hotel room, and I promise you that you will not lose any muscle size at all. I don't care how old you or young you are. You will not lose that, because it's all a question of the tension applied to the muscle fibers, I should say. If you apply enough tension and you stimulate them, you'll keep them. It's the old use it or lose it thing.
Well, you've done it
The whole
again. Another great issue, and I can't wait to read those articles myself.
Yeah, and you want to know that I'm going to make it a mission. I am just as excited to write this stuff as hopefully people are to read it, because as I said many times, I enjoy it because I learned stuff myself just in doing the research on my articles. I learned so much about probiotic supplements and the microbiome that, I mean, it's the stuff I didn't know myself, and I've actually studied this. And yet here, just doing the research, I learned a tremendous amount of information. And as I said many times also, this is all practical. Everything I write, people could use now.
Yep.
In other words, it's not, you could use it right there. As soon as you finish your article, you can put everything to use. It's very practical. I'm not writing theoretical crap or stuff like that, or I'm not writing just to please myself like a lot of these other publications. I mean, you wonder why they write about certain articles. I mean, they don't seem to have any practical use. I mean, what's the point? I mean, scientists will like them, but, not everybody is a scientist. So, the question is, what's the point,
But that's what I like about your newsletter. You read all that scientific stuff, and you come out with the practical information that helps us in our everyday lives.
That's my going rule stick, if you want to call it. If I come across information and I don't see the practical value for readers of Applied Metabolics, I won't write it. I mean, there's a lot of, I can't tell you how many interesting subjects to me that I bypass because I don't think they'd interest the majority of people. They'd interest, people with a heavier interest in science. You would probably be interested, and some other people. But I have to admit, the vast majority of people, they'd say, "Well, what good is this? How can I use this stuff?" And they'd get bored. They wouldn't want to read it. So I don't write about that stuff.
Well, my friend, you did it again. Another great issue, and I can't wait to read this one. And I'm also excited about what you're working on now. So you have a good one, and we'll catch you next month.
Thanks a lot, Rich. Always great to talk to you.
You too, Jerry.